Welcome to Communication at the Table, How to Not Be That Guy. I'm Brandon. I'm your moderator for this lovely time, but I'm going to go ahead and throw it over to our panelists to introduce themselves. So, Paula.
Hi, that's me. I'm Paula. You can find me on Twitter at Art and Audio. I use she, her pronouns. I am a horror GM, and sometimes I will run wholesome things if you ask very, very nicely, but I am primarily horror and drama.
Okay, and Crystal.
Hi, I'm Crystal Mazur. I'm a freelance writer, and you can find me on all social media at BodyandSoul152. I use she, her mixed pronouns, and I'm really glad to be here. Oh, I'm also an educator by day. Sorry.
Sade. Sade.
Oh, did you say my name? I'm sorry. Like if
my bad. I think my noise gate is acting up.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, I've had that happen. Hi, everyone. I'm Sade Smith-Edwards. You can also call me Ambrose. I go by she, they pronouns. It's a pleasure to be here. You can hear me on the Lovely Craftians podcast. That's where most people know me from. By day, I'm a UX UI designer.
And last but not least, Stephanie.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Allen. I am one half of Charm Person Games. We're a queer women-owned professional game master service. You can book with us at charmpersongames.com and find us on Twitter at charmpersongames singular because of character limits.
And once again, I'm Brandon, aka Ashenworks. I'm a co-founder for Huntsman's Hydra, which is a tabletop RPG channel over on Twitch. And I do tabletop design as a freelance writer and designer. With that, so we went ahead and came up with some questions, but if I see something interesting in chat, I'll bring it up. So starting off, we say that guy. What does that mean to you? How do you define that guy at your table, and what kind of traits do you typically associate with that?
I will go. Or Paula, looked like you were getting ready to go.
I would love it if you spoke first.
Okay. So my understanding of that guy, because it's one of those things that depending on from person to person varies. My experiences with that guy is someone that it's not necessarily they just can't read the room, because like there's people that obviously cannot read the room for various reasons, but it's despite not reading the room, but also like being told directly several times about something and still doing it regardless, or continually crossing boundaries that have been past established, for instance. Because hey, understand if you didn't get it the first time or couldn't pick it up, let me talk to you about it. And there might be ways of crossing boundaries. For me, it's boundary crossing repetitively, personally.
Yeah, I totally agree. And some of the warning signs that you'll see, like an early that guy as you're starting to play a game, meeting a new group, I would imagine is, I have no lines, no veils. Why are we talking about safety? Like, we're all friends here. I think we should just be able to talk like adults. Or they're, in terms of the meta, not things they might say, they're playing a different game. They are clearly trying to get something out of the game that you're playing that is different than either what was established by the GM or what the other players are trying to get. I feel like I see this more often in D&D, where what you can get out of the game is so broad, at least how it's being used. But yeah, I've definitely played games where people have a goal that is not aligned with the rest of the group.
I would add that it's somebody who doesn't listen. Some people struggle more with communication than others, and you may think you've made a clear distinction to them about this is okay and this is not, and now it's a different situation and they've crossed that boundary again. Those may be the same to you, but they may be incredibly distinct to the other person. But what that person should still do is listen to you, learn, absorb what you are saying, and actually make an effort to understand the greater thing, and not that just that one specific occasion. That's hard for some people, but that guy doesn't try to keep learning and doesn't keep listening and continuing to try to improve how they communicate with you.
I see them also as all of that, but combined crossing that boundary between playing an antagonistic character and being an antagonistic person at the table. Someone who purposely tries to use, like, I play Vampire the Masquerade a lot. So vampire politics in real life at the table versus you are all players in a game and you are using vampire politics and in the game. And like crossing that boundary too.
Yeah, I honestly, y'all hit all the notes I had. For me, I give it a very broad definition of a continued negative presence at the table. So that can be anything from lack of communication, which is what we're here to talk about, to violating safety tools, and even the most tropey, that's what my character would do, in only a negative sense. Not really what was said of they're playing a different game and they want something else that the rest of the table has very adamantly said they don't want at the time. So I guess with that, have you ever had that guy at your table? And then, what happened and how did you handle it?
Man, I mean, I'm more often a player among another that guy player. As a GM, I've gotten to the point where my groups are too curated for a chance of that to happen. And that is on purpose. But in the early days, I did have it. I run convention games. So a game with all strangers, usually they are polite. Like you find out someone's that guy. That's why I said, here are the warning signs. But I do think I've been in a few games like that, and I have GM'd one where it did happen. And the thing I personally did, if it's a friend, because home games, a lot of times you're playing with people who you had some kind of prior relationship with, or you met at work or through life, is to communicate like with them. Like the thing is we're saying that guy is defined by somebody who has a lack of communication. They want something from the game. Instead of saying, I want this from the game, they just take it. Whether that be boundary crossing, or like if they have a power fantasy, if they want to be mean to the other players and that's for them, they don't say, I'd like to play through this, they just do it. So someone has to start that communication, and maybe that's a skill they've never learned, and explain to them that if they don't care to learn it, bye. But if they do, maybe they just don't realize it. And I've had scenes that were incredibly antagonistic where that guy was really unleashed, and I chatted with them after, and they were like, I thought everyone else was out to get me and here to shut me down, and telling me that I don't belong in this group. And I was just lashing out at what I thought was an attack. And I said, okay, we have a lot more to talk about here. And so they often have things to say, and it's usually misinterpretations, or, I was playing this game. Why is no one else playing my game properly? That's a common thing. So once everyone's speaking the same language, we can start a conversation. And then if the conversation isn't leading anywhere, or that guy is not willing to have one, is the game right for them? That's when you start talking about changing up players.
I would say, yes, I think everyone here has had that guy at their table in general. At conventions, I've heard, because I've never ran at a convention, but I have heard that there is a higher chance of getting that guy at the table. But luckily, like earlier in my career, I've had that guy. I tend to be a bit more vocal now, for sure. And it was before that safety was more, like I was like, learning more about safety in the last 2-3 years. I've been in TTRPG for 7 years. And it was a random stranger that became part of like a private group. And they were talked about several times that I found out by the GM, like behind the scenes, because they didn't want to like put them out there like, hey, you made some people feel uncomfortable. I was very appreciative of the GM having that conversation with that person and realizing people were uncomfortable. But my only thing is I wish that they said that they knew we were uncomfortable, because we didn't know. Like it just kept happening like over and over again, slightly different every time, because they got talked to every time off to the side. I would say that like for me, my final straw and is when like I like had a conversation was like they brought up something racial, and it had to do with something that Black people are called. I'm not gonna like bring it up. It's not like the N-word or anything like that. It was just like, hey, derogatory term. really close to that. You got really close. And I said, like, in character, I'm like, we're not going to do that. We're not going to do that today. And they're like, why are you suddenly really mad? And I'm like, I'm going to go to the bathroom. Cool. Like, and I had a conversation with that person. GM had a conversation with that person, and we had a conversation right then. But at that point, we've all had conversations with this person separately, not realizing we all had different individual conversations with that same person, and eventually left the group. But yeah, it really sucks to know that the conversations were had, and it still was like not hidden. Like, it's weird. Like, it's just like, how is it not hidden? How are you not getting that information and told from different perspectives too? It's weird. Like, but hey, it was tried. That's the thing. We tried to communicate. Maybe we were missing a communication point there.
I try to head them off as much as I can at the beginning of every game. I tend to have a, hey, here's how to be a good player section. I talk about safety mechanics, and then I say, here's how we're going to be a good player. And I talk about things like saying yes to the adventure, bringing in quieter gamers, directly asking them questions in character to bring them into the story. And then I also talk about taking turns. That's something that, like, I'm very excitable. If you've ever gamed with me, you've heard me talk over you at some point. I am working on that. I have to be reminded. I have to make heavy use of my mute button. And I am not ashamed to use myself as an example when I have this conversation with new people that I haven't led a game for before, to say, use myself as an example of, hey, make heavy use of your mute button. If, like me, you're just really excited and tend to blurt out things when you need someone else to be talking, things like that. And I talk about how it feels crappy when people are like talking through your seed. So don't talk through other people's seeds, and let people build people up to have a good time, that kind of thing. And then I ask for player buy-in to all of the things we've talked about, the taking the turns, bringing each other into the story, using safety mechanics. And I insist that they give it to me verbally. And what that does is, when I have inevitably someone who has forgotten that conversation that we had 2 hours later, we're playing, and there being a murder hobo in the middle of the game, and can say, hey, remember that conversation we had where we talked about like building each other up, and that we're a team, and that we want to work together to tell a really good story? You're not following that now. You agreed to that. And what you're doing now is alienating other players. So let's dial it back. And I have never had any kind of objections to that. They're like, oh, and then they like take a step back, and then we can get back to playing the kind of game we want to play it. It's not perfect, but that's kind of the tool that I use to help with that guy.
Yeah. So mine was not handled nearly as eloquently, but that is because this was 20 years ago when we were in high school. And I did not have the social skills or social awareness of what was going on. And like, this individual and myself would get into screaming matches at the game table, and it would not be fun. The individual, and this was the only individual that had an issue, that individual was not asked back to our table at eventually. They were only there like 2 or 3 sessions tops. So that's one of those moments where I was not proud of how I acted, and was definitely not proud of how the situation was handled. However, looking back and reflecting, I know where I went wrong, and I know that I am actively trying to be better. And I do think, like, with what Stephanie says is, make clear expectations right away, and then have players buy in. And if they can't do that, then they're probably not right for that particular table. And that's okay. Like, being okay with, this just isn't right for me. That is also a very clear communication that I think needs to be communicated more often too, between players and GMs.
Yeah. And actually, jumping on that, so my that guy moment was actually with me as the GM, and it was the realization of, okay, this is not my table. Like, this is not the table where I can run a game effectively. And it was because I had 2 players who had different that guy traits at the same time, butt heads. One of them came in with the expectation of a different kind of game, like we talked about before, and the other one came in with what the rest of the table was doing, but took it to a next level with like everything is in character. There is no out of character conversation. So then those two butt heads. One person takes it as, oh, this person is attacking me out of character. The other one is now saying, no, this is an in character conversation. I think that campaign lasted 2 sessions, and that was sophomore year of college, so 6-ish years ago. But like in those cases, we see throughout all of these a lack of communication or things that you did to try and make it better and still sometimes falling through. So in those cases, we've learned a lot. When you're setting up a table now, what is your expectations for communication? I know Stephanie's touched on this a bit already. And then what do you bring to the table and how does that change as a campaign goes? I know this may be different for like a one shot or a charity game where we're more very quick with getting things ready to go.
With my experience, because I've been like inspired by a lot of the GMs in my life that I've known in the last 2 to 3 years. So definitely what Stephanie said, like setting that expectation. Another thing that like helps a lot is like kind of touching on what you said, Brandon, about someone came in not expecting to know what kind of game it was. So for instance, a lot of people think Dungeons and Dragons most of the time, and Dungeons and Dragons is like a one type of game. But I like to play horror games. I specifically like to play investigative heavy games. So that means it might be a little slower. It might be you need to take things in. It's like doing a pitch or letting people know what to expect. So here's the pitch of the game. Here's the understanding of the game. Here's some elements of the game, which I think Paula does. Of like, hey, here's some themes. I don't want to take all your stuff. So, but like, it's like, hey, understand that this is the vibe of the game you're coming into. Also with safety, what I like to do is like rating system as if it's a movie. And I know like sometimes you set it up for the player as well. Like, what do you think this should be? It also helps during the session 0 if this is a campaign. To say like, hey, I'm expecting this to be R for language specifically. We're not going to go touching certain things. We're not going to go into like heavy details about XYZ, or we're going to go well into it. So like prep for that. And they come in with expectation of what the game is well-roundedly at the beginning. And if they don't like it, or this is not their cup of tea, it is very okay to say, you know what? No, like, yeah, I read the pitch, I saw the stuff. This is not my vibe.
Yeah. I mean, Sade covered a lot of like the initial things to do of like, here's the menu. Like, can you eat anything off this menu? Is there anything you want struck? And if some things can't be gotten rid of, maybe this isn't the game for you. But to talk about campaigns, which I run very few of, but have definitely, I've had that guy in so many of my games. I'm like, I have endless stories, which I won't get into, but, in campaigns, the thing you have to remember the most is people fundamentally change as people, and they have an entire, if you're doing weekly, for instance, they have an entire life that they did between session 1 and session 2. So for instance, this is outside in safety, I've had a player who watched a movie that freaked them out, and they had a line for maybe 6 weeks while they dealt with that. Events are happening to people in their lives, especially with Zoom games. You really don't know what they're going to come in with. And so like the problem player I mentioned at the answer to the last question was one of my really close friends. We hung out in person. We talk at conventions for like 12 straight hours. We were just really close. And then when the pandemic hit and we moved this campaign into Zoom, he changed fundamentally, and everyone gets depressed. Everyone gets sort of stuck at home. I learned later that he was, had some nice legal weed that is legal in my state, but it changes. Like you think about, is a player drinking at the beginning of a session versus the end of a session? They are behaving differently. Like I don't outlaw drinking or any sort of use of whatever at the table, but I watch when people bring a drink into frame what it might be, because people turn into that guy. when inhibitions go away. So watching how people change over the course of weeks, if they're going through some stuff. I played 3 different home game one-shots the week that the Supreme Court thing came through, and it was a completely different game with the friends I've known for years. So in campaign style, you can't think, okay, we did our session 0. Everyone's lines and veils are up. Session 1 went really well. Everyone's gelling. Session 16 has different people in the group. People have had life events, and the communication needs to happen about that. And that doesn't necessarily mean, oh, GM, just be okay with that. Like, you can kick someone from your group if they're slowly becoming a person that is just not gelling with the game anymore. I've definitely had a D&D campaign where someone kept joining the Zoom game in tears, claiming that, no, the game will cheer me up. And that was not pressure I was interested in. And we had a conversation. They ended up leaving, and they were fine for a while, but they were going through some things. I'm like, why don't you take a break? Because I can't have you joining a Zoom call mid breakdown and then saying, Paula will make it better. So, talking with your players, seeing if it's right for them to take a break, if it's right for the game to take a break, and just know that it's so different from one-shots because you don't see it happen. It's so incremental.
So for my day job, I'm a special education teacher. And a lot of the things that I do is trying to figure out multiple ways of communication with my students. So things like learning how to read body language and facial expressions, especially for individuals who may be neurodivergent. Learning how to read their facial expressions is something that is very, very important to me, specifically when I'm running a game. So if it's a long-term campaign, I learn how to read my players' body language specifically. Because that can tell me a lot of how comfortable they are with something, if something is bothering them, or if they are uncomfortable to say something at the table. And then giving them multiple ways to communicate with me that's not just talking specifically at the table. So I don't do this for one-shots or anything like that, but all my friends have my phone number. They can text me because a lot of times texting is a very, very low stress type of communication. I've also done a Google form where I can turn off collecting people's information. And it tells you right on the Google form, your information is not being collected. So giving stuff like that and players avenues to communicate with you in ways that they feel safe. So in a session 0, as a GM, I might ask, how do you want to communicate with me? That's not just sitting down and talking. Is there any other forms that you feel comfortable with? Because I think that can also open up a lot of different avenues for having tough conversations that people may not be able to do face to face.
Stephanie, anything you want to add?
I think I would just be repeating myself and other people. So I'm good to go on to the next question.
Fair enough.
I would say one other thing, and it's kind of oh yeah, there's the pre and then there's the during and stuff like that. I know there's after to make sure to communicate that as well. Also having because what I do is consent form. Obviously, I think most people do the consent form. I by hand or if I can get automation working, put it into the lines and veils columns. And I let people know hey, look at your consent. Everything that's if it's yellow for one person, yellow for everyone, red for everyone, right? But it changes over time because people realize things sometimes during games that, oh man, this is weird. Why do I feel weird? It's asking players to do some self-assessment, but if it keeps coming up, hey, I'm gonna keep checking that lines, veils, and invitations sheet. It might keep adjusting, and sometimes I'm oh, something got added from the last session, and they didn't realize that hey, even though clearly no one's talked about specific insects, I'm starting to get distracted by insects for some reason. I'm not scared, but it's taking me out of the game. So I'm going to put it a line and specifically do not talk about, I don't know, scorpions for whatever reason, right? So things change before people realize it. And that could be bought on by that guy. It could be bought on not by that guy. And sometimes like it's keeping that sheet open or checking on it, not just me, but everyone. So yeah.
I also want to toss in quickly, this sort of ties in what you were saying, Sade, but also Crystal, you, different communication styles that people have. Because as you learn your players, if you're assigned this like cast of people to stream with and you've never met them before, or if it's just your home game, home group, best friends, people have different communication styles. And so it was mentioned reading body language. I'm personally quite good at that, and I can read faces, but that skill is useless for Alice is Missing when I'm not looking at faces, for instance. So where people have their skills and where people talk, I'm also a very narrative person. I think in monologue, so I just need to move my brain monologue to my voice, and all of my thoughts are pretty well compiled, come out the second I think them. Most of my friends aren't like this. So when I'm on a Zoom call with them, I'm like, yeah, tell me what you're thinking about this game. You seemed a little off. Is there anything I can do to make this game more comfortable for you? And they go, was I off? And then like 4 days later, they're like, here's a full list. So, knowing that communication is a game of patience, it's a game of listening just as much as it is talking. And I've definitely tried over and over to introduce things like stars and wishes to my home group, and it will not take, because it's just not their communication style. Instead, they'd rather go out for drinks with me or have one-on-ones where we hang out and talk about other things, and the game will come up naturally. They are much more comfortable with that, and I get much more like juicy info, both in like where they want their character to go and then safety. So I think it's knowing communication style, and to tie it back into that guy, everyone has a communication style. So to keep in mind, if you're the GM thinking, oh, that guy, they're just not listening to me. I ask them questions and they're like, I don't know. You might get something in a few days. You might say, can you write it down? Here's a Google form check-in every 10 sessions that everyone has to fill out at their own pace and tell me what they're doing. Like, think about how they want to have this conversation if a conversation's on the table.
And you both just hit on what the next question was going to be, which was how often you check in and then styles of checking in. So go, both of you. At least for me. No, you're good.
No,
I had them in a random order, so there was no way you were going to know.
I would say that I'm a big believer in the after session decompress.
Yep.
And like I don't do it for one shots typically, unless it was something like longer and more involved, and I know I'm going to see these people in a similar game in the near future. I may ask if people want to do it. But even when I do a like short campaign, like a 4-session kind of thing, we all know it's going to be 4 sessions. I will still do it at the last one because I still want to know things. And I've been calling it Lucky Charms because I always mess up the order. It's a modification of Stars and Wishes. It's Stars, Wishes, and Feelings. And it's important that you say feelings in a silly voice so that we feel less awkward about sharing our feelings. But it's naming, it's, for those who haven't played Stars and Wishes, it's you give a star to a specific person for a specific reason, something cool that they did during the campaign, during the game, the session that night, or just like a really funny quote they said, just something that like, if you were a teacher, you could give your gold star, this is who you're giving it to, and this is why. It's not, oh, everyone was awesome. It's a specific thing. And when I'm a GM, I try really hard to give my gold stars to people who make really big, interesting character choices. And I pay attention to players who are maybe a little quieter and a little more passive. And when they do something big, or they like do something to push their narrative forward in a way that they don't normally, I really try to call that out and give them a star so that they feel more comfortable with that. And do that. And then you have your wishes is something you want to happen next time. And this is the thing I've noticed that players do tend to struggle with. Like, oh, I don't have a wish. I just want to play. I want to have a good game, and I'm like, no, you have to have a wish. You have to have a goal because it's going to be better for both you as a player and me as the GM to know what you want, that kind of thing. And it can be small. It can be, oh, I just want to have a chance to talk to this one character, or it can be big. Like, I want to find out what the core of this mystery is. But then I also really believe in the feeling part. Feeling is really important to me. And I've had to learn the hard way about like how to deal with that, but you just state a feeling. That's it. It is what you are feeling. It may or may not be related to the game. And it's important to remind people that nobody takes ownership of anyone else's feelings. It is not your responsibility for how someone else is feeling. And if there is something that needs to be talked about as a result of that feeling, now is not when we do it. We do it later when we've had a chance to reflect on it, when we've had a chance to calm down. And it's really important to me that we do this every session because it's important to build the muscle to talk. It's weird. It's awkward. It feels uncomfortable. A lot of people don't know what to do with it when it's their first time doing this. And that's kind of the point, because when you do need it, you don't want those feelings. When you do need to say, hey, I'm really annoyed at what happened and I'm angry and upset about how this game session went, you want to already have that muscle memory of knowing how to say you're feeling and how to have a goal and how to have a wish. So you build that muscle memory. To me, that's really important. So that's like a mini check-in every single game. I write down player goals and wishes to remember them for next session. And I check in when people are not feeling great about the game. Like, oh, I don't know, we had that big discussion about the mechanics and I'm still bummed about that I didn't get to use it or whatever. I check in with them later. Or, hey, you said that my character did this thing and it upset you, both your character and you personally. It's been a day or two. Let's talk about it. Sade and I did that in Comfort County Snowfall. My character upset her character, which ended up upsetting Sade. And we talked about it a few days later. And we realized we just had a miscommunication.
Different form of communications on that one.
Yeah.
So like it was
And then it was fine. But no, there was no blow-ups. So I'm a big believer in having that mini kind of check-in every time. And maybe that exact format doesn't work for you and your players, but soliciting some kind of feedback as often as possible is really important to me because I can't read facial expressions and body language. I have that kind of neurodivergence.
Yeah. And actually, using myself as an example, because I'm a producer on one of the games Stephanie's in, I am terrible at wishes because I am like one of Paula's players that wants to go out for a drink and talk about the game for an hour. So usually in that case, it's I give a wish and then probably 2 days later in our Discord chat, it will be like, okay, so wait, actually what I wanted to see was this. And then we go from there.
I think it really is worth accommodating to those kinds of players too, because Stars and Wishes is a great way to be like, we're already playing a game. Let's gamify communication because we're already bought into this one thing. Let's continue that. But I really can't get it to take in my group. And for instance, you have players that are just like, can we just talk? Because I don't have thoughts, but if I talk to you for like 30 minutes, I will have the best thoughts ever. I just have to get there. And it's worth it if you have that long-term campaign going. For one shots, it's great. Like, give me your stars and wishes or like two shots or whatever, you can go to the next thing. But some of the things, like I have my home group and some of them want me to come over to their house for dinner and the game will come up. Some of them have what we call a ride home, which is one of my friends, Jesse, used to drive me home from in-person sessions and he's moved away since. And so after the Zoom call ends, he and I stay on the Zoom call for about an hour after during the ride home, because that's when we used to talk about our games. That's when he gave me his best thoughts, was when he was driving me home. So we simulate that. I've got 2 players that do ride home, one player that likes to get drunk and talk, one that likes to have dinner with me. And if I have the time, I will accommodate that, or I give the next closest thing of giving them time to talk to their significant other and then text me or whatever it can happen. And so I love the starting point of Stars and Wishes, but if you personally can't get that to take in your game group, start abstracting it out. Like, what's the core of it? How can I get that out of someone? So if, Brandon was in my game, I'd be like, okay, when do you want to schedule a one-on-one Zoom call for in this long-term campaign where maybe we chat about life, maybe we just become friends, but also what do you want to know about what can I get out of you? And that's perfectly fine as long as you're hitting those core Stars and Wishes.
And then actually jumping onto that, another option that I've seen in a couple games that I'm in now is we really do stars and feelings, but in those cases, we split it between your personal and then the character. So it'd be like, how's the character feeling? How are you feeling? And then for stars, it's usually, what's a star for you? Like, what was your shining moment this session? And then what is a shining moment for someone else at the table? And the main reason for that is you want your players to feel like they're doing something significant. And when you do stars, not everyone always ends up with a star. It's not exactly like a participation trophy kind of thing, but you want them to feel like I did really good in this moment. And most of the time you're the rest of your table will hop onto that and be like, yes, that was going to be my pick. Now I have to pick something else. Thanks. And move from there. I've had so many of those where we get through the whole list and everyone's like, well, everyone's already said what I was thinking. So here's the other thing. But yeah, just different styles.
I would say besides back, I guess going back to the question a little bit, because if I remember correctly, another thing that I tend to do is I know like over communication can mean a lot of things, but in the case for like when I do a game or whether I'm player or running it, it's restating several times during like the aftercare session, like, hey, like just in case you forgot, if you're not like, you can, this is the rules that we have. We have an open like table policy. You can leave. I will not take it personally. Okay. I'm not going to get mad if you do that. Sometimes people do need that reaffirmation that like, hey, I'm not a teacher. I'm not your parent. I'm like literally like I'm a person running your game for you. If you're uncomfortable, whether it was because of me or the situation, or you're just personally not feeling well, it could just be walking up. Some people don't like that. Some people like, but I make it clear, like, you can do these things. Here's all forms of communication. Are these all okay? You can tell me afterwards, of course, like after the game too, like what Paula and I think all of us actually said. Sometimes wishes won't work. Sometimes like, I don't want to talk about my feelings, or I'm not sure what these feelings are. And they'll just say like, I don't know what they are, but I feel something. I don't know what this is. And I'm like, okay, reminder, you can personally message me about it a day from now, 3 days from now, a week from now. I just don't ever want to like purposefully hurt anyone. Like if that happened, I will automatically say, sorry, let's talk about it. Okay. Like, but I'm not gonna, like, that's not gonna happen. Like, just literally like reiterating these are the things that are in place. Let me protect you. It's all about having fun at the end of the day. And if you're not having fun, then we need to correct something, essentially.
I had a thought and then it left.
I know that feeling well.
I will say, I will jump in here to see if I can cover you while you think.
Yes.
The amount of times I've had to tell players who I absolutely adore, no, you're not in trouble. No, I'm not mad at you, is astounding. So just remember, if you are a GM, when you say like, you're allowed to leave, I won't be mad at you. In prep for Virtual HorrorCon, the amount of times I've had to say there are no consequences, there are no penalties. Like, here's how the game wants to be played. And I had a friend who was streaming for the first time ever on a Friday Virtual HorrorCon game. And she was like, okay, so if I mess this up, or if I turn off my camera, I forget, because we used to turn off our cameras when we need to leave. It's like, I'm so sorry. It's like, okay, no one's gonna scream at you. Like, you're like, not in trouble. Your pay's not being docked. Like, there's no actual consequences. And so I've had people apologize profusely for not having a wish, or for not communicating something properly, or even I've had people apologize to me for being triggered at a table. Like, I am so sorry I had an emotional response. I'm so sorry I cried. I'm so sorry I had to leave the table, or that I had to leave this game. And so I know it's not the GM's job to preempt that, but remembering that a lot of people, and this includes that guy, to bring it back, might not realize what they're doing. And if you say, hey, asshole, stop putting these players in an uncomfortable situation, they might think they're in trouble, when in reality, in the early stages of noticing someone is that guy, they might not know. They might be playing a different game and thinking everyone's playing the game wrong. So let's talk how we can do it where there are no penalties. There's no losing an RPG, not really. There's no getting in trouble.
That did help me, so thank you, Paula. The biggest thing, and we did not talk about this before this panel, so I'm glad I've seen everybody talk about this on the same page. That guy doesn't always know they're that guy, and most of the time it's just a miscommunication. Like, that is the biggest thing we're trying to tell you here, is that most of the time these stories that you see on Reddit, Facebook, whatever, are miscommunications that are simply solved with a one-on-one. Unless it escalates to the point where everyone at the table has had this conversation, then you might have that guy. But these are all just some ways that we've been able to communicate at our tables what works best for us, what may not work for us, and go from there. And I know we have about 10 minutes left, if I'm calling this right. So we should probably start outros. And we'll start with Stephanie.
I just want to make my closing statement to say this one thing you can take away from this panel is that assume well of your fellow players, assume well of your GM. If they are being annoying or rude or making the experience bad for you and for other people, assume they are not doing it intentionally and assume they probably aren't even aware that other people feel that way. There's so many differences in communication. There's neurodivergent conditions, there's cultural conditions, there's anxiety, like so many things. Just assume well of your fellow players and be kind and direct in talking to them after the moment is passed. That's all. I'm Stephanie. You can find me anywhere you can find Charm Person Games. You can book with us. And right after this, I will be in an actual play of Hour Hunt on the Gehenna Twitch channel. And you can catch me Tuesdays on Huntsman's Hydra. I play in a Swords of the Serpentine actual play called Denari's Half Dozen.
Ambrose.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm Sade, or Ambrose, she, they pronouns. You can find me anywhere as SS Ambrose, Twitter, SS Ambrose _ because someone took it already. I don't know why. Holy shit. But here we are. You can find me at Table Goth on Wednesdays, playing the Hunter the Reckoning game. Never Coming Home, which is getting heated and emotional. You can also see me at an actual play after this, which is Assassins, which is going to be on Carry On Comfort. And you can also see me tomorrow with Paula on Wickedness Part 2. And oh my God, I'm excited for that. And I'm also going to be on Inner Demons panel as well tomorrow. So yes, that's me. What's the next one?
Crystal.
So I think I'm going to give a takeaway too from this panel, and that's that if you are a GM or a leader at the table, model what you want to see your players do. If you want your players to talk about your feelings, talk about your own feelings. If you want them, sometimes you have to give permission to people to do things that you want them to do because they think, oh, it's out there, but I can do this. This is not right. Or I don't have that ability. So give your players permission, like verbally, and model what you want to see as well. So I'm Crystal Mazur. You can find me on social media at BodyandSoul152. You can find the stuff that I have published at thegeekypanda.com. You can also find me at Darker Days Radio podcasts, and I'm going to be starting a series for RPG freelance mentorship. Hopefully starting recording that soon and looking for people to be on it.
We're going to talk later.
Yes, please.
And Paula.
Hey, it's Paula. I'll also do a takeaway because that sounds fun. And it actually ties into Crystal's a little bit in terms of modeling things. We say communicate, talk to people. But sometimes the hardest thing for a GM on the planet is to sit down one-on-one with someone and say, so there's been some trouble, like starting that conversation, starting difficult, intense conversations. So if you're a GM and you're like, how do I handle this? How do I deal with it? Hey, there's this thing called role-playing games. And they let you practice having difficult conversations and moments with people in a safe area with friends where there are no consequences and safety is in place. Literally do that. Have fake fights consensually. Have fake difficult conversations because it gets easier. That is how I learned how to do that. So literally practice. I'm Paula. You can find me at Art and Audio. I am a horror GM, and I will also say that if you have any follow-up questions about safety, I talk about safety endlessly. So literally DM me, tag me in a tweet, whatever. And I'm running a bunch of things that I can't announce yet. So just watch my Twitter.
And then for me, my takeaway is, okay, if you've listened to our entire panel, most of this has been conversation over Zoom or like Twitch campaigns or con games. Bring safety tools and communication to your home game, please. Like that is the biggest thing I've learned in the past 2 years. Once I was able to start having home games again, over Zoom, of course. But the biggest takeaway is like my biggest fights at the table were at my home games where we didn't have safety tools. So now I'm bringing safety tools. You do what you need to do. With all that being said, I'm Brandon, aka Ashworks. You can find me everywhere on the internet at AshenWorks, except on Twitter, Ashen_works for similar reasons. Why? Fun story. It's a comp sci major whose website is ashen.works. So we should swap, but their DMs, but like they won't answer me. Anyways, with all that being said, I'm co-founder of Huntsman's Hydra. We have several shows. Go check out our schedule over on Twitter or on link.bio/Huntsman's Hydra, where you can find Stephanie, you can find a bunch of other cool folks. I just guest starred on our Blades in the Dark game, Fire in the Dark, which was a ton of fun. And we have some new shows with casting calls opening this month, so keep an eye on our Twitter. With all that being said, any final takeaways?
I would have liked to, but I'm pretty certain everyone got it covered. Y'all are pretty awesome. So I think we're fine.
Cool.
I think we're Gucci.
In that case, we'll go ahead and wrap up. Next panel is soon. I don't have the schedule in front of me. That's my bad. But yeah, stay tuned over here on YouTube, or go check out Gehenna Gaming on Twitch, or Carrion Comfort Studios on Twitch, where we have actual plays going all the heckin' time, all this weekend. Go right now. But thank you all so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.